And as you move forward, David, I mean, what is the thing that excites you most about the psychedelic renaissance happening now?
Well, I've been a psychiatrist now. I think I prescribed my first psychiatric medicine. It's an embarrassing story, really. I prescribed my first medicine in 1973. Sorry, 1973, sorry. And so what's that? That's 50 years, isn't it? So 50 years ago, I prescribed my first medicine as I was doing a locum. And we're still prescribing that drug today. And there's been really no progress. We've slightly modified it. And that's kind of chilling. There's no other branch of medicine where you haven't seen any real progress in 50 years, except psychiatry. So I'm really looking forward to the fact, I'm hoping that my successors will be able to prescribe psychedelics and MDMA for the disorders which they're going to work for. In our own personal research, we're very excited that we've just started to write the protocol to do what will be the first study ever, probably, of psilocybin for a heroin addiction, which is an extremely, extremely difficult disorder to treat. And we've been studying it. We've been imaging the brains of people who use heroin to understand the mechanisms of addiction for nearly 30 years now. And in all that time, we've been trying to study people before and then 3 months after they've been abstinent. We've never managed to keep a single patient abstinent for 3 months. And that tells you how difficult it is. And I'm hoping that a psychedelic might help to promote abstinence. So that's really, it's probably the last major study I'm going to do. And if it works, it'll be a good note to go out on, won't it?
Well, I think your legacy will live on far beyond any of these studies. So thank you so much, David, for your contribution, and thank you for being with us tonight. I think we have some time for some questions. Before I dive into I had one that was asked to me earlier, which I promised to ask you, which was, we talk a lot about we talk a lot about these classic psychedelics. The reality is that in the lab and in clinic, you're using synthetics. Mm-hmm. Is there a difference between, for example, synthetic psilocybin or a real magic mushroom, and do we have an entourage effect where the other elements in the mushroom are maybe being beneficial as well?
I think it's quite plausible. The entourage effect is a term that was developed to make sense of medical cannabis. And medical cannabis, which generally is whole plant extract, oils, definitely does seem to have greater benefit in a number of disorders than just the single pure either synthetic or extracted THC or CBD. So it's completely plausible there might be an entourage effect in mushrooms as well. And it's just very, very hard to study. It might be particularly important, I guess, in microdosing. So if microdosing of dried mushrooms, dried psilocybin mushrooms, could well be better than microdosing the individual, the pure drug. I mean, I think it's plausible. Ayahuasca's a bit difficult because ayahuasca's already got another psychoactive substance in. So actually, ayahuasca's likely to be better than DMT because it's got other things in it. LSD isn't natural, so that's the control.
And with that, I open it up to other questions. Sorry. Come to you.
A question for each one of you. David, question for you is, are there studies being done on the spinal cord and effects there on reflexes? Because we've talked mostly about the brain and effects there. And question for you, Sean, is, when you think about pharmaceuticals, most of them have an unfair advantage of owning patents on a molecule and then recurring revenue. And what we heard with psychedelics is a single treatment can last very long. So the companies you're investing in, what's their strategy? How they're going to scale and compete? Well,
he can answer the hard question, and I'll answer the easy one. One one of the reasons psychedelics are so safe is they have very little effects below the cortex. There are very few receptors in the spinal cord. Actually, the one exception is that MDMA has been shown to potentially have some value in healing spinal cord lesions in preclinical models. But psychedelics, probably not. Psychedelics really do seem to be targeting those very high-level human cognitive functions.
This is a tough question, which is very topical and quite... so all I'll say is that these treatments, as they come out, are going to be quite expensive. We've seen it, for example, with Spravato, which is Johnson & Johnson's ketamine product. It came out at, I think, $2,400 per spray of ketamine. So that's a nasal spray, ketamine. But bearing in mind they had to recoup almost $1 billion of clinical costs, right? However, that drug is now Johnson & Johnson's top-selling drug, and it's estimated to be $1 billion a year drug. They sold $189 million of that product in the past 3 months. So I think there's evidence to show that these expensive treatments, there's a market for it. People are desperate. These are people who have failed with people who have failed 2 prior treatments before. So often they're willing to pay, and the trick is going to be getting the insurers willing to pay, as they can see the long-term benefit of people maybe not taking additional drugs and stuff like that. To answer your other question on IP, that is part of the sort of race towards developing these novel psychedelic drugs, which have much longer intellectual property protection. Those are the sorts of drugs we discussed that the US Department of Defense is investing in, and those will be maybe potentially daily drugs or drugs you might take more frequently because they don't have a psychedelic effect. For the psychedelic drugs, we've got MAPS coming and Compass potentially taking psilocybin onto the market in 2025 and 2026 respectively. Those drugs have much shorter IP. They'll have 8 years of protection on the drug itself, but then they've got patents around the way they deliver the treatment. So they've got patents around how the room looks, they've got patents around how and what people undergo from the therapy side as well. So that's part of the scaling. Yeah, if you, oh, sorry, I don't have the...
Where is the mic?
Hi.
Sorry, I should just say I used to be director of AstraZeneca. And my own belief now is that you shouldn't be ripping people off with these sort of high prices. We should be making things accessible. And it rant over. My question is, I'm very into the world of high performance, and I call it biology, so I'm into flow. And I'm familiar with people that sit in flotation tanks, so they change their brainwave, so they learn Arabic quicker. I'm talking special forces people. People that go
You need to get a bit nearer your mouth.
Sorry, astronauts that go to space and they get this overview effect. So these are things I call them endopharmacology. So there's natural, we can show gratitude to get serotonin and all those things. So there's a certain level we can get to, I call it endopharmacology, of just using our brains and our bodies, right? I'm actually interested in people and companies transforming quickly, like a quantum computer. So my question is, are you familiar with the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett at Harvard, and how emotions are built and how how our brains are actually working now? Because it's not what we thought, is it? A lot of the recent research is telling us that we can actually do things quite quickly and keep doing them.
Well, I think that is what's remarkable about psychedelics, is that they can do in 30 minutes what it takes. Well, you never had a good antidepressant at AstraZeneca, but what Pfizer took 10 weeks to do. Sorry.
We just invented beta blockers.
Yeah, the rapid transition. I mean, of course, we've known that all along. We've known that things like a trauma produces an almost immediate disturbance of the brain, which can last for eternity. So, I think it's completely plausible that you can make these changes, but it's in systems rather than in receptors. I think that's the big difference.
Hi. Sorry.
Or networks, Speak.
Yeah. What advice would you give to someone who doesn't have kind of a degree in medicine or a VC fund, able to kind of progress to the cause, but is passionate about it and interested in helping with the understanding, use, legalization of psychedelics?
Super. So you give each of your friends a copy of my book. for Christmas, you follow me on Twitter, you follow Drug Science on Twitter, and become a supporter of drug science. But just generally challenge prejudice. I mean, we're gradually pushing it back, but I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that still do have a lot of misunderstandings about these drugs. And every time someone, challenges you, every time someone says, well, they must be addictive, mustn't they? Because otherwise they wouldn't be controlled. You just say no. And tell them to look on the Drug Science website where all the answers are.
Just say no. Nancy Reagan said that, I think. Use it in a different way.
Yes. No, they're not. Okay, carry on.
What about age?
Yeah.
Is there anything about children, younger people, older people? When is the right time to...
Yeah, I think
forget about regulation, just think about the brain.
Yeah, no, well, interestingly, and this may be relevant to both the nature of conservatism growing as people get older and the nature of also Alzheimer's, these receptors become less, they reduce in number and they're reducing efficacy when you get older. So whether we can preserve a younger brain by using psychedelics is an open question. But it also raises what is, I think, perhaps the more interesting question, which is, given the fact that we've got an absolute epidemic of distress in young people, and we know that traditional approaches don't work very well, would psychedelics be helpful in people under adult life? And that's a sort of extremely difficult thing to study, but we are beginning to try to do that. So one of the studies we're starting at Imperial, we're looking at young people who cut themselves to deal with distress by cutting. Now, there are ways which you can help people think differently about that urge to cut. You can get them to kind of literally create other scenarios using that default mode network. And we're going to do a study to see whether with a sub-psychedelic dose of psilocybin could accelerate or facilitate or improve their abilities to switch into a different mode away from self-harm. So that process is beginning, and I think it's, if we get ethics, it will definitely happen, and I think we will.